Thank you so much for joining us today, which is July 27th, for the next session of Insights from the Field. And welcome back to those who joined last week's to review the art of the offer. Today, we'll continue the conversation in a session titled The Science of the Offer. My name is Zarina Yeager, and I'm a Senior Agent Experience Manager here at Avenue 8. I will be the host for today's session. Once again, I am joined by Alan Long, who will be taking us through some key points on how to guide your buyer to write a successful offer. Feel free to drop in any questions or comments in the Q&A or chat box as we go. We will have time for a Q&A after this session. So if you're worried about anything, we will always get to those questions then. I will go ahead and turn it to Alan. Take it away.
Well, thank you, Serena. Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Last session, we covered the presentation of the offer. Again, you may not be able to present the offer in person. And if that's the case and you can't present the offer in person, then try to do a conference call at the very least. When you present an offer in person or you present it over the phone, your chances of creating a successful transaction increase dramatically. And again, I always use the line, let me pop by 6:30 at the end of the day. It takes me all of 15, 20 minutes to do a little presentation to you and your seller. So just let me know whatever time works for you guys. So I try to make the idea of me going and doing a presentation in person just really informal and casual and not going to be a big deal and not going to try to sweat them down and get them down in price, et cetera. I try to make it kind of like that. If they say, no, my seller really doesn't want to meet with anybody, then I would say, okay, let's do a conference call. So can you arrange a conference call for us to do it that way? If that doesn't work, then you do the presentation to the listing agent. But it's in that order of priority. Try to do it in person, try to do a conference call, then try to do the presentation to the listing agent. And again, remember, if it's all predicated on doing a good presentation of the offer. And if you want to see the way to do a good presentation of the offer, rewatch the first session and you'll get an idea at that point. And also remember that, and what I'm going to tell you today is what works for me. And it's advice to you guys. And most of it, I think, will work for you. But of course, if it doesn't, and it's not your style, by all reason, abandon it. Okay, so before we actually get into writing the offer, there's also a bit of a science that's involved prior to that. So I'm going to start at the very beginning. I have this buyer, Kathy. We've decided that Beechwood Canyon is the place for her to live. So I've identified 3 houses in Beechwood Canyon that I'm going to show. The first thing I do is I research the listing on the MLS. What does that mean? That means that I read absolutely every line that's on the MLS. I read the remarks. I read the agent's remarks. I read the showing remarks. I then go down and read each one of those little boxes to see what did they fill in? What did they write? I just want to be really in tune and understand everything about this house that I'm going to show. And sometimes there's a little ditty that's hidden in the remarks. And then you call the listing agent and you ask them a question that's already explained in the remarks. And then they think, are you not even reading what's in the MLS? So again, it's very important to read from the upper left-hand corner to the bottom right-hand corner on the MLS. Okay, 2 other things on the MLS, which I've told you guys about before. One is days on the market. When you click on the little box that says days on the market, you will get a complete listing history of the property that I think goes back all the way to the year 2000. What am I looking for there when I look on the listing history? I'm looking to see what has the property done before. When did it last transfer? How much did it transfer for? Then when I see that, if I click on the MLS number for that sold piece of property, it will bring up all the pictures and all the copy. I can then look at that, knowing what the house looks like today, to determine, okay, how much work did they actually do to the house? What did they do to the house? So I really like going into the listing history to get all that information, and then to see who's the agent that sold them the property. Is it the current listing agent? Again, all this information is at your fingertips. Now, the next thing I hit is the APN number on the MLS. What happens when you hit that? Well, you get to see who's untitled. You get to see how much they're owed. You get to see what they paid for it. You also get to check the information that the tax assessor has to the MLS. The tax assessor may say 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, and the MLS may say 2 bedrooms, 2 baths. You then know you need to ask the listing agent, why is there a discrepancy in this bathroom count? And I'm checking the square footage to see if there's any discrepancy in that. And really, I want to know as much as I can. Did they pay their property taxes? Are they current in the property taxes? Are they in default on the property taxes? All this information is on the same MLS sheet that you pulled up to get the agent's name and number so that you can make the appointment. Okay, so the 3 properties that I've picked, I've done all that research, and now I'm going to call up and set the appointment. Generally, for a 3-bedroom house between the 3,000 and 4,000 square foot, without massive grounds, I usually give myself about 30 minutes to show the house. Then, depending on where they are at, if they're close to each other, I'll usually give about 20 minutes to get from one house to the other house. Now, one thing I do like to do when I'm in house number 1, and I realize what time we're going to leave and probably what time we're going to get to house number 2, I send the listing agent at house number 2 a text saying our ETA is going to be whatever I think it's going to be. So in case we're running a little bit early, maybe they can have the house prepped and ready for us early. Of course, if we're running late, I want them to understand we're running late, for them to wait for us. So I give them the heads up on the first one. So we set the appointments. Okay, I'd like to get the client in my car. So normally what I would do is I would say, okay, we're going to see these 3 houses. I'm going to come to your house and pick you up at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. We'll see the houses. I'll probably drop you off at home around 3 o'clock. Now, since COVID, they may be a little hesitant to want to get in the car with you. So depending on your comfort level and their comfort level, they may want to follow you with their car. Either way, here's how you drive. This is the way I was trained when I was an assistant. You pretend you have a glass of water on the dashboard and you cannot spill 1 drop of water from that glass. So that means you're driving very slow. You're being very careful. You want to make the whole viewing and showing process really smooth, and you don't want the client nervous over the fact that you're driving a little too fast and a little too reckless. Okay, the other thing I do, the morning of the showings, 2 things. I drive the route. Okay, I've got my route planned out, and now I drive the route that morning. Why do I drive the route that morning? I want it to be flawless when I pull up to the house, that I know where to park, that I know where the front door is, that there's no construction in front of the house, that the neighbor across the street isn't doing a big project and now is parked everywhere in front of the house. And where am I going to park my car? Again, I want it to be as smooth as possible, and I want the buyer to feel so comfortable that they're dealing with a professional who has done this a lot, and this is not the first time I'm out showing houses, and that they're in really good hands. And the more familiar I am with the route and where to park and where the front door is, the better off they're going to feel. Hopefully, I've previewed all these houses. If I haven't previewed all these houses, I've at least driven by the outside a couple of days before to determine that my client will like the neighborhood and the basic look of the house from the outside. Okay, the day before the showings or the morning of, I reconfirm with all the listing agents. Just want to let you know I'll be coming by at 1 o'clock this afternoon, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, I reconfirm with my buyer. Okay, the order of the showings. I am shameless in the order of my showings. I generally always show from the lowest price to the highest price, and I leave the one that I think they're going to like the best, which is generally the most expensive one, for last. And it's a shameless way to show because it just gets better and better and better until they walk into the best one and it's the last showing. I like to save the house that I think they're going to respond to the best for last, because hopefully we'll spend the most amount of time in that house. Now, you cannot always control this. Sometimes it's backfired on me and they've actually responded to the very first house and they didn't like the last 2 houses. So you have to be a little flexible on that, but generally that's the way it goes. So I've set 3 listings, 3 showings we're going to see, 1 on Primrose, 1 on Belden, and 1 on Brynmore. Okay, so I've done my route. We're going to go to the Primrose house, park my car. Just before we go in the house, I always like to tell the client the price of the house and the bedroom count, and maybe the square footage if I feel it's germane to the conversation. But I want them to walk through the front door knowing the price and knowing the general size of the house. I just find that that information seems to make the showing go so much better. Okay. Now, I've walked into the house, ding dong, I introduce the listing agent to my client, and then I stand back. And then I basically say nothing as we're going through the house. I let the listing agent take my client, and I am following 10 steps behind, and I am basically saying, mm-hmm, 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 mm-hmm. I've had longtime buyers say to me, Alan, do you realize that every time we show a house, you walk through it with your hands behind your back and you're just going, mm-hmm, 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 mm-hmm. I was like, yeah, I guess I do. So, but that's what I do. And I don't say anything until the very end of the showing. And then when we're done, I will say to my client, do you have any questions for the listing agent before we leave? And then if they do, they'll ask the listing agent their questions, and then we leave the house. Now, if we get back into my car, I will say to them, well, what did you think of the house? And they'll start to tell me what they think of the house. Or if they're following me in their car, before we get back into our cars to go to the next house, I will say to them, well, what did you think of the house? And I'll listen really carefully to hear what their retort is. I also encourage them to take a brochure or a setup sheet from the house. And when they get back into their car or my car, that they write one little defining line on that, which will, when they're looking at these setup sheets in a day or 2 days, will remind them of the house. Like a beautiful stove, beautiful French stove in the kitchen, a massive backyard, something that's defining about the house so that when again they read it, they'll remember which house it was that we looked at. Okay. Okay. So then my client's going to say, I asked the client, well, what do you think of the house? In this instance, I've shown her 3 houses. The last one's on Bryn Mawr. I know that's the one that she's going to like. She says, well, I really like this house on Bryn Mawr. I'd say, well, interestingly that you would like that house. She says to me, but Alan, I want you to know, I think the price is a little high at $2,199,000 because it's a small house. She said, what was it, 1,200 square feet? I said, yeah, it was a little under 1,200 square feet. She said, well, that and the stairs up to the front of the house, I just think it's high for what it is, but I really like the house. I said, well, you know, I've done some research because I have done research and I know that average price per square footage maximum in Beechwood is $1,200 per square foot. With the 1,200 square foot house, that only comes out to about $1,450,000. Now, that doesn't take into consideration everything you love about the house is what she created outside. She did the waterfall. She did the cold plunge. She put in the sauna. She put in the hot tub. She put in the meditation deck. She created a resort outside. Problem being is the bank appraiser is not going to take that into consideration. I understand how that brings so much value to you, but we have to be cognizant of the square footage that we have and how it's going to affect the appraisal. So my recommendation would be on this, because she asked me, what do I think we should come in price-wise? I would say is to come in about 20% underpriced, which would bring us somewhere around $1,750,000, and hopefully we can get an offer at $1,800,000. That's what I would suggest to her. She now adds that, well, you know, I need to do a survey on the property because the last piece of property I bought, we didn't do a survey, and I found we had tremendous encroachments on the property. And everybody said, why didn't I do a survey? So I'm going to need a survey. Now, I know that getting a survey is going to take 30 days. So I need 30 days of due diligence. And I know this is important to her. So I'm going to make sure we get a survey done within her contingency time period. Most likely the listing agent, when I ask for a 30-day due diligence, is going to push back and say, I can't take my property off the market for 30 days for you to do everything. I'll explain the need for the survey. If I have to, I will bifurcate the survey contingency and say, you know what? I'll do all our other contingencies within the average 17 days. We'll get our inspections done. We'll do our appraisal. We'll get our loan done. But I need 30 days for the survey. And generally then they'll be understanding and they'll give you the 30 days. And I'll say, look, I can get the survey back and in her hands prior to the 30 days, so she can look at it and determine there's no problem, we will remove that contingency. I said, but I know using my surveyors that by the time they get her that actual map, we're going to be right there at the 30 days. And I'm going to make sure before I sign with the surveyor that he can deliver this survey well before the 30 days. So it gives us time to go over the survey. So that's pretty much how I would handle writing the offer. And I've managed the buyer's expectations based on the fact that it might not appraise out, but I let her know we have an appraisal contingency, which means if the property doesn't appraise out for the sales price, we're under no obligation to continue with the transaction. And we're free then to do a myriad of different things in order to get the transaction to proceed. But let's cross that bridge when we get to it. First, let's see what price we can secure the property at, and then let's see what price that the appraiser comes in at. So that's pretty much how I would handle the whole thing from start to finish, from determining what is it I want to show all the way to advising my client how to write her offer. And now I'm going to take that offer and I'm going to try to do a presentation with that offer. So that pretty much is how I handle it. Do we have any questions?
Looks like we don't have anything currently. Guys, feel free to ask any questions around what we've just gone over. If not, we can move forward.
Yeah, I think the best advice I can give you in the whole process is to really be prepared. I'm really prepared with the houses, with the way I'm going to show the houses, and with the information about the houses. Now, I happen to know on this house that's listed for 2.2 that the buyer paid $1.2 million for the house back in 2018, and the buyer owes the bank $1 million. Now, I'm not going to necessarily share this information with my client unless she asks. If she asks me, well, what did they pay for the house? I have to let her know what they paid for the house. But I also give them the proviso that what they paid for the house really is not indicative of what the house is worth today. And I tell them, let's assume that they inherited the house, which means they didn't pay anything for the house. Would that mean the house is worth nothing? No, the house is worth what the current value of it is in today's market, regardless of what they paid. But let me research and I'll find out for you what they paid for the house and when they bought the property. So again, I'm being extremely careful about getting all the information that I can, and then who and when I divulge that information to. Now, also knowing that she owes $1 million, I know that if we settle at $1.8 million, and if she has, about $150,000 in closing costs, she'll have plenty of equity still left in her property. So I feel that we might stand a chance of putting this transaction together.
Now, Alan, it does look like we have spurred some questions. I will go ahead to Blakely. She has her hand raised. So we'll go ahead and unmute you, Blakely.
Hello, Blakely.
Hi, Alan. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. This is super helpful, as was last week. So one, I love what you just said. I get the question all the time about what was it? What did they buy it for? I love the piece about inheritance. I'm going to use that line for sure. My question though was, obviously we're in a transitioning market now, but we've been coming off the last 2 years of a crazy, insane market where, what the comps are in some cases doesn't really matter. I mean, of course, they're important and they're informative, but it's all really about the competition and what it's going to take to win the house. In those times where, the example that you're giving now is obviously not competitive, it's opportunity to negotiate down on the price, the house is clearly overpriced. In the situations where it is pretty competitive or there's multiple offers and you're expecting that, and it really could go as high as someone's willing to pay it, how do you have that pricing conversation?
Well, that's a whole different story. This house that we're offering on has been on the market for 60 days. And there are no other offers. So every offer needs to be tailor-made to the situation that it's in. Let's assume that the property just came on the market, and let's assume it's not overpriced, and let's assume there's a whole bunch of offers on the property. I then write the sweetest offer I possibly can. The problem here is my client really wants a survey, and I'm going to really hold out for that survey and try to get as much time as possible for the survey. Now, maybe the seller has a previous survey and we could use that one, but if not, it might be really hard for me to get my client what they need. But I will tell you where I see the market going, especially with the fact that I think we're going to have an onslaught of inventory in the middle of September. You're going to be able to have time to negotiate on these transactions and get your due diligence. But no, you could not at all use that strategy if there were multiple offers on the property. No.
No, for sure. I just mean, the conversation of, we got clients all the time asking in those competitive situations, well, what's it going to take to win it? What should we offer? And my advice is usually, I don't actually give them a number myself. I point them to the comps. We go through them. We do, which one do you like better, et cetera, and kind of go one by one. And then, we talk about the different numbers. There's a number to win it. There's a number that's worth, and there's a number that you're willing to pay. And we kind of hone in on the latter number. But I don't know if you have a different strategy in competitive situations.
Well,
Advising them on pricing.
I've often used the discussion with them that, okay, give me an offer, a price, that if you hear that it went to another bidder for $1,000 more than we offered, you'd be upset. So give me that price, so that if you hear that it's sold for $1,000 more than what you're giving me the price of, you're okay with that because you really were maxed at your top dollar.
Okay.
And then I really try to, and then I'll say to them when they give me a price, if they'll say 2 million, I'll say, okay, if you hear it sold for 2,000,001 tomorrow, are you okay with that? If you are, then we'll offer 2 million. If you're not, then why are we not offering 2,000,001? So that's usually where I take them to the top of their comfort level for the property,
Okay.
which will tell me how much they love it and how much they're tired of looking. So
Right.
it'll be a combination of those two, but that's usually where I bring it to. When they give me the dollar amount, I'll add something to it and say, okay, if you hear tomorrow that they got an accepted offer of 2,1, are you okay with that? And then I wait to
Okay.
hear what they have to say.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Thank you, Blakely. We do have some questions, Alan, in our Q&A. First one coming from Barbara. What do you hand to the client when they get in your car? What is in your folder, Alan?
Usually a setup sheet of the property. And I'll usually hand them that just before we're getting ready to go into the property, because I want them to leave at the end of the day with at least one piece of paper reflecting each one of the properties for them to have made notes on, so that they'll understand what they've got and remember what it was they saw. But at the very least, I will let them know the price and the size of the house before we walk through the front door. Very important. And the other thing is, bring them through the front door. A lot of times, for some reason, agents will take them through the kitchen or take them through the garage. It's like, no, take them through the front door. Start them in the living room so that they can get a real feel for the house, and they'll remember the house so much better that way.
All right, wonderful. Our next one is from Noel. Do you typically keep it to 3 properties when you're showing?
Yes. I try to keep everything in 3s. People's memories work really well with 3s. The minute you get over 3, you start to confuse people. Now, if the buyer rather was from out of the area, had a limited amount of time, and we had to see a lot of houses, I probably wouldn't show more than 6 houses at any one time. And then I would take a break between number 3 and number 4. Stop for a cup of coffee, stop for lunch, whatever appropriate at that point, and then continue the other 3 houses. But it gets super confusing for the clients when you start to show them more than 3 houses.
I love it. Everything in 3s. I think that's how my brain works as well. All right. Our next one is from Barry. Alan, what if the seller says that their client is ready to accept an offer from the best bidder?
The seller says they're ready to accept an offer from the best bidder. I would say, well, I want to be that best bidder. Again, I would say to my buyer, give me your top price. Let's hope it sticks. If I tell you that it's sold for a little bit more, you're going to be okay with that tomorrow. If not, let's keep going up in our price. So that's pretty much how I think I would handle that again.
Definitely.
Hope I answered that question.
All right. And then our last one that we have, at least for now in the Q&A, is from Jennifer. And do you give them any printouts to look at along the way while you see properties, MLS listings, anything along those lines?
Generally, I'm having conversations with the clients as I'm driving from one house to the next. I also, in my determination of the route, I'm picking the most picturesque route to go from one house to the next. And again, I just want everything to be as cream puff as possible from the beginning to the end. So I'm really cognizant of that. So I'm really talking more to the client as we're driving. about the neighborhoods, about the streets. I'm pointing stuff out to them. Also, some people get a little upset to their stomach when they're reading and you're driving. So again, I try to make it as good as possible. I may give them a package afterwards of some information, but generally not. But again, it just depends on the property, the size of the property, the scope of the property, the complexity of the property. But for a regular single family house, 3,000 square feet, 3 bedrooms without extensive grounds, pretty much is just a setup sheet.
Wonderful. Those are all the questions, Alan, at least for right now. So I think we can move on. I'm sure others will be spurred.
Right. Well, that's really what I've got for the session. And again, I just think that it's super important that you be as prepared as possible, both in what you're presenting and both in the information of what you're presenting. And when your client says to you, yes, I want to write an offer on this house, you need to know the comps. You need to know what pretty much the house is worth. You need to know what houses per square foot are selling for in the neighborhood. You need to be really well prepared to answer all those questions so that you can take it to the next step and write the offer. And again, in this situation, because the house has been on the market for 60 days, my client's pre-qualified, she's putting 20% down. All that's really straightforward. The hardest thing we have to deal with is the survey and getting her enough time in which for her to do the survey. So that's how I pretty much would construct this offer. But again, because there's no multiple offers and there's nobody else in the wings trying to buy the house. If there was, we would change our strategy accordingly.
All right. And then if we have any other questions, we now have time for our final Q&A to end the session. Feel free to also raise your hands, guys. If you'd like to speak directly, we can always unmute you.
I mean, I think it's all pretty straightforward, what I've told you. It's just, I think a lot of good little pointers and hints of showing property and how best to show it. So again, this is what's worked for me. And I loved that part of the process, the house hunting. And I always would tell my clients that when I got them in the car that, this is my favorite part of the whole process is finding the house and negotiating the transaction. I usually reiterated those 2 points with them. And when the market wasn't quite so hot, I used to tell them, this could be a bit of a process. This could take us anywhere from 3 to 6 months. So again, trying to manage their expectations, even though we may find the perfect house within 2 weeks. So again, they feel, okay, there's no pressure. I'm not going to rush them. They're not going to have to jump into the first thing. When I tell them, look, this could be a process. It could take us 3 to 6 months to find that perfect house for you.
And Alan, it does look like we have a comment from Barbara. She would love to hear your method when an appraisal comes in low.
Oh, okay. Here's the whole thing. You want to nip that in the bud. So you want to get to the appraisal before it comes in too low. I always tell people it's like when you get stopped by a policeman for speeding. If he starts to write the ticket, no matter what you say, the ticket's done. Okay, it's over with. You have to convince him not to write the ticket before he takes that pad out and starts writing it. So the listing agent, you need to make sure the listing agent gave the appraiser good comps on the appraisal and gets the name and number of the appraiser and ask the appraiser, when do you think you might have the appraisal in? Oh, I should have it by next Monday. And let's assume today is Tuesday. That listing agent is going to call that appraiser on Thursday or Friday, days before they say they're going to have the appraisal done. And they're going to say, how is it looking? Now, the appraiser will not give the listing agent a number, but they might say, it's looking okay, it's looking fine, or, I'm having a hard time bringing it into price. At which point, then you're going to try to get more comparable sales to give to the appraiser to see if you can bring that price up. Once you get the low appraisal and it comes in, it's difficult. It's very difficult. Now, in this situation, I've managed the buyer's expectations. I told them that I'm concerned we're going to get a low appraisal in. So when the lower appraisal comes in, they're at least prepared for the price. Now, there's many ways to deal with the lower appraisal. You can get the seller to reduce the price. Difficult. You can get the buyer to come in with more cash down. Could be difficult if they don't have the cash. I do point out to the buyer, if they come in with more cash down, it's going to lower the mortgage and it's going to lower their monthly payments. So it's not a tremendously terrible thing that this is happening. Again, you need to manage the client's expectations. So if you think it's going to be a problem with the appraisal, you've got to do that upfront with them and let them know. The other thing we could do too is if the seller's got enough equity, which this lady does on this house, maybe she carries a second for part of that difference. And we carry the second at really good terms. And then my buyer may be amenable to that. So there's a lot of things we can do if the appraisal comes in low, but it's tough. It's very tough. So the thing is, try to be preemptive, and make sure that that appraisal doesn't come in too low. So hopefully that answered that question.
Definitely. And Blakely actually wanted to let us know she loved the session last time. And could we talk about how the presentation or the close would be different in a multiple offer situation? Do you go first, last? How do you get the seller focused on just you, your offer, and ignore the others?
Again, a really good question. I like to go first if I feel I have dynamite in my hand that I'm walking in there with. The dynamite being that I have an amazing offer, way over asking price, super clean terms, and the offer is only good upon presentation, which means I'm here presenting the offer to you in person. If I leave, my offer is no longer any good. So it's way above your asking price. It's giving you everything you want. We're letting you stay in the house for 29 days free of charge after the close of escrow, but it's only good if you sign it now. So that's if I have TNT. If I don't have TNT, it almost doesn't matter. But I do think the fact that you're doing the presentation in person and try to get across to the seller the integrity of your client and the integrity of you as a real estate agent. And sometimes when they see that you're telling the truth and that you do have integrity, that will sometimes make them want to take your offer, even if you're not high price on the table. So again, every situation is different. And that's why it's always good when you're entering into a situation like that to call me or call Scott or call Nick and talk to us about the situation and let us offer you a whole bunch of suggestions, because we'll ask you all those questions to determine what's really the nature of what we're dealing with right now.
All right. And we have another one from Barbara. How do you write the term "it is only good upon presentation" without turning the listing agent off?
Again, it depends on what I've walked in with. If I really have walked in with a tremendous offer, it deserves upon presentation. And if they don't want to accept it, what are they looking for then at that point? Do they think that they're going to actually get better than what my offer is? So it really depends on the nature of your offer, how strong of an offer you've written to do upon presentation. It really has to be a strong offer to do that. And if it is, the listing agent, it's up to the seller to do whatever they want to. They can easily accept my offer and just tell the other three people in the living room, sorry, the house is sold. And I'll try not to smile too much as I'm walking out of that house.
All right, guys. I don't see any questions anymore at this time. So I believe we are good to wrap up. So that does do it for today's session, everybody. Thank you for all who have attended both sessions or just today. If there are any questions that we may not have gotten to, or anything that comes up at any point moving forward, feel free to reach out to us at contact@avenue8.com. We'll go ahead and drop that into the chat box as well, so you guys can all see it there. Our next segment of Insights from the Field will kick off in 2 weeks, where we will be joined by Richard Grossman, Avenue 8's brokerage president, for an introduction in price reduction. During this session, Richard will review how to navigate price adjustments, manage seller expectations, and ultimately broker the best possible deal. Stay tuned for registration details in your inbox. And thank you again, Alan, for leading us through today's session, and to all of you for joining. Hope to see you in a few weeks.
Bye-bye.